The Starweaver drifted through the electromagnetic soup of the Orion Nebula, its hull gleaming with the iridescent patina of quantum-reactive alloys. Captain Zara Ntak sat in her command chair, 3 of her 6 sensory tendrils wrapped around the navigation interface, while the others twitched with mild irritation. Another routine cargo run was about to become monumentally boring. Rixel, her junior communications officer, was different. Where most Krellian crew members would be content with the monotony of deep space transit, he vibrated with an almost nervous energy. His smaller secondary eyes constantly scanned the communication arrays, while his primary optical sensors remained fixed on the holographic displays. "Captain," Rixel's voice carried an unusual tremor. "I'm detecting an anomalous signal." Zara's tendrils coiled slightly, a gesture of mild skepticism. "Define anomalous, junior officer." The young Krellian's fingers danced across the holographic interface, pulling up a cascading series of spectral analyses. "It's not like anything in our standard communication databases. The signal is complex, layered. It doesn't follow any known transmission protocols." Most captains would have dismissed such a claim immediately. The Orion Nebula was notorious for strange electromagnetic phenomena. Random energy discharges, quantum interference, and spatial anomalies were common. But something in Rixel's tone caught Zora's attention. She extended a sensory tendril, touching the communication console. The data flickered beneath her biological sensor, a subtle vibration that most of her species would miss. But Zara had spent decades navigating the most complicated trade routes in known space. She recognized pattern complexity when she saw it. "Isolate the signal," she commanded. Rixel's movements became a blur of precision. Holographic windows expanded, contracted, merged. Spectral analysis gave way to deeper computational deconstruction. What initially appeared as random noise began to reveal something extraordinary. "It's not noise," Rixel whispered. "It's information. But not technical information. It's something else." The ship's secondary systems began to react. Quantum processors that normally remained dormant during standard transit started to engage, their crystalline matrices humming with an unexpected resonance. The anomalous signal was doing something impossible. It was adapting to the ship's communication systems. Zara leaned forward, her multiple sensory tendrils now fully extended. The signal was transforming, revealing layers of complexity that defied standard communication models. What began as a barely perceptible transmission was now expanding, filling their communication arrays with a cascading wave of something. "Cultural markers," Rixel said suddenly. "These aren't just random signals. They're carrying cultural information." The holographic displays began to populate with fragments. A musical note here, a visual pattern there. Snippets of what appeared to be linguistic constructs, but nothing that matched any known alien communication system. Images flickered, landscapes, faces, abstract artistic representations that seemed to pulse with an internal logic. "Source," Zara demanded. Rixel's response was almost a whisper. "Unknown. But the signal's point of origin. It's from a region of space marked as unexplored in our star charts. A small blue-green planet in a relatively unremarkable solar system." The signal continued to pulse, each transmission layer revealing more complexity. It was an invitation, a statement, and a mystery all wrapped into one extraordinary communication. Neither Zara nor Rixel realized it in that moment, but humanity had just made first contact, and they were doing it in the most unexpected way possible. The Galactic Research Consortium had never been more confused. What began as a routine signal analysis had transformed into the most perplexing communication event in recent galactic history. Dr. Lyra Vex, head of Xenocommunication Studies at the Centauri Prime Research Institute, stared at the holographic displays with a mixture of frustration and fascination. The transmission from the mysterious blue-green planet defied every established protocol of interstellar communication. "It's not a message," she muttered to her assistant, a young Trelbian researcher named Cax. "It's an entire cultural ecosystem." The holographic displays danced with fragments of human expression, a piece of music that seemed to simultaneously break and reconstruct every known musical theory. Visual art that shifted and changed, revealing multiple layers of meaning with each subsequent view. Fragments of stories that appeared simple on the surface but contained profound emotional complexity. The Krellian transmission logs have been distributed to top research facilities across 5 major galactic civilizations. Each species approached the mysterious signal differently, but all shared one common reaction: complete bewilderment. The Orcian linguistic team was the first to make a breakthrough. Led by senior linguist Zorn, they had been working around stellar cycles to decode the transmission. Their initial reports were nothing short of revolutionary. "These aren't just communication patterns," Zorn explained during an emergency consortium meeting. His holographic projection flickered slightly, revealing the strain of countless work cycles. "These are adaptive linguistic constructs. Each piece of the transmission seems designed to be understood differently by different cognitive frameworks." A panel of researchers from various species listened in stunned silence. The Treldian representative, a crystalline being named Anxadel, projected a series of complex mathematical equations that attempted to map the transmission's complexity. "The entropy of their communication is unprecedented," Anxadel observed. "It's as if the message is simultaneously a puzzle, an invitation, and a transformative experience." Back at the Centauri Prime Research Institute, Dr. Vex had taken a more unconventional approach. Instead of treating the transmission as a technical challenge, she began to experience it. She allowed the fragments of human culture to wash over her sensory inputs, observing how they triggered unexpected emotional and cognitive responses. A piece of music, something called a jazz improvisation, seemed to challenge the very concept of structured sound. It was chaotic yet structured, random yet purposeful. Another fragment, a visual representation called a street art mural, told a story that changed depending on the viewer's perspective. "They're not trying to communicate information," Dr. Vex realized suddenly. "They're trying to communicate experience." Cax, her Trelbian assistant, looked confused. "Explain." Dr. Vex pulled up a series of transmission fragments. Most species communicate to transfer specific information: coordinates, technical specifications, diplomatic protocols. But these humans, they're communicating something far more complex. They're sharing how it feels to be alive. The research teams began to notice strange side effects. Researchers studying the transmission started to exhibit unusual behavioral patterns. Trelbian mathematicians found themselves creating art. Orcian linguists composed music. Krellian engineers wrote poetry. Something extraordinary was happening. The transmission wasn't just a message. It was a form of cultural infection, a mimetic wave that transformed those who encountered it. And humanity hadn't fired a single weapon. They hadn't sent a single diplomatic envoy. They had simply shared a glimpse of their existence. The galaxy would never be the same. The first signs of change appeared in the most unexpected places. On Treldia Prime, the Central Art Museum underwent a silent revolution. Traditional crystalline sculptures that had remained unchanged for millennia began to transform. Artists started incorporating chaotic human-inspired elements. Asymmetry, emotional rawness, and unpredictable forms that defied the species' millennia-old aesthetic principles. Curator Anxela watched in fascination as young Trelbian artists created works that would have been considered heretical just stellar cycles ago. A piece inspired by what humans called street art now dominated the museum's central gallery. It was a massive installation that changed with viewer perspective, its crystalline structures shifting and refracting light in ways that seemed to tell multiple stories simultaneously. On the Orcian communication networks, something equally extraordinary was happening. Linguistic professors found their students abandoning centuries of rigid communication protocols. Instead, they were experimenting with human concepts like metaphor, emotional nuance, and narrative complexity that had previously been considered unnecessary. Professor Zorn, who had been at the forefront of analyzing the human transmission, became an unexpected cultural icon. His lectures, once dry and technical, now incorporated elements of human storytelling. He would begin his academic presentations with what humans called personal anecdotes, a concept entirely foreign to Orcsian academic tradition. Communication is not about perfect transmission of information, he would tell his bewildered students. It's about connection, about creating a shared experience. The Galactic Concordance, the primary interspecies governing body, became increasingly alarmed. Their carefully maintained communication protocols were being challenged at every level. Diplomatic communications that once followed strict, predictable patterns now incorporated elements of creativity, emotional intelligence, and unexpected problem-solving approaches. On the entertainment networks, human cultural fragments became the most sought-after content. A human concept called improvisation swept through alien performance arts. Musicians from multiple species began experimenting with jazz, creating entirely new forms of musical expression that celebrated spontaneity and individual creativity. Dr. Lyra Vex continued her research, documenting the transmission's impact. What had initially seemed like a simple communication event was transforming into something far more profound. The human transmission was not just sharing information, it was teaching a fundamentally different way of experiencing existence. Her research team discovered something even more startling. The transmission seemed to adapt to each species' cognitive framework. Trelbian researchers found mathematical patterns. Orcsian linguists discovered new communication possibilities. Krellian engineers saw innovative technological approaches. It's like the message is alive. Cax observed during one research session. It changes based on who's receiving it. Dr. Vex nodded. Not a message, an invitation. The most significant changes occurred among younger generations. On multiple planets, youth began rejecting traditional social structures. They demanded more creative approaches to problem-solving, more emotional intelligence in communication, more celebration of individual expression. Governments grew nervous. The Galactic Concordance called an emergency session. Representatives from multiple species gathered, their traditional diplomatic uniforms feeling suddenly outdated and restrictive. This is more than a communication event, the Krellian representative warned. This is a cultural revolution. No one could disagree. The human transmission had done. The Galactic Concordance had always prided itself on predictability. Their diplomatic challenges were typically resolved through carefully constructed protocols, mathematically precise negotiation strategies, and centuries of established interspecies communication methods. The emergency session convened in the Nexus Diplomatic Center, a massive spherical structure that floated in the neutral space between three major galactic territories. Representatives from 12 different species gathered, their communication translators humming with tension. Ambassador Krelltax of the Krellian Merchant Consortium was the first to break the uncomfortable silence. We cannot ignore the systemic disruption caused by this human transmission, he stated, his sensory tendrils coiling with agitation. Our social structures are experiencing unprecedented instability. The Treldian representative, a crystalline being named Anxadel, projected a series of complex holographic charts. Each visualization told the same story: unprecedented cultural shift, increased creativity across multiple species, and a dramatic reduction in traditional conflict resolution methods. The data is clear, Anxadel reported, but the interpretation is anything but straightforward. Behind the diplomatic scenes, research teams were working overtime. Dr. Lyra Vex had been summoned to provide insight, her reputation as the leading expert on the human transmission making her an invaluable resource. It's not an attack, she explained to the assembled diplomatic advisory board. It's an invitation. Humans are fundamentally proposing a different way of existing. The advisory board looked uncomfortable. Existing differently was not something most galactic civilizations considered a positive trait. Meanwhile, something extraordinary was happening on the communication networks. The human transmission had begun to inspire unprecedented collaborative problem-solving. Scientific teams from previously competing species were now sharing research, breaking down long-standing territorial boundaries. An Orcsian quantum physics team collaborated with Trelbian mathematicians to solve a computational problem that had stumped researchers for decades. Their breakthrough came not from traditional analytical methods, but from an approach inspired by human creative thinking, looking at the problem from multiple simultaneous perspectives. The Galactic Concordance began to realize they were facing a challenge unlike any in recorded history. This was not a military invasion. This was not a technological threat. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could interact. Ambassador Krultax discovered something particularly disturbing during a private research review. The human transmission was not just changing current societal structures, it was retroactively reinterpreting historical conflicts. Species that had been traditional enemies found themselves reconsidering centuries of hostility. The transmission introduced concepts like empathy, collective problem-solving, and mutual understanding in ways that traditional diplomatic channels had never achieved. "We're being transformed," Enx Edel observed during a private conversation with Dr. Vex, "and we don't even fully understand how." The younger generations across multiple species were the most dramatically affected. Educational systems began to change. Rigid learning structures gave way to more creative, collaborative approaches. Students were encouraged to ask questions, to challenge existing paradigms, to imagine new possibilities. Most alarming to the Galactic Concordance was the transmission's apparent lack of specific intent. There were no demands, no territorial claims, no technological specifications, just a continuous, adaptive communication that seemed designed to inspire rather than control. Dr. Vex had a theory. "Humans aren't trying to conquer us," she explained. "They're trying to connect with us." As the diplomatic session continued, no one noticed the subtle changes happening in the communication systems. The translation algorithms were becoming more nuanced, the diplomatic interfaces more flexible. The entire system of galactic communication was slowly, steadily transforming. Humanity had launched an invasion of a different kind, not with weapons or technology, but with imagination. And the galaxy would never be the same. The human diplomatic team arrived without fanfare. No massive ships, no ceremonial processions, just a single, somewhat battered interstellar transport that seemed to have been patched together from various technological sources. Dr. Elena Rodriguez adjusted her worn leather jacket, a stark contrast to the pristine diplomatic attire of other species. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held a combination of curiosity and amusement that seemed to unsettle the waiting diplomatic reception. Beside her stood Marcus Chen, a retired military strategist whose relaxed posture betrayed years of complex tactical training. To his left, Aisha O'Keefe, a quantum physicist with a habit of sketching complex theoretical models on any available surface. Completing the team was Jacob Novak, a street artist whose portfolio was as much a diplomatic tool as any communication device. The Galactic Concordance had prepared an elaborate first contact protocol, elaborate choreographed greetings, precise communication scripts, carefully measured diplomatic distances. The humans ignored all of it. "Hi," Elena said, stepping forward and extending her hand, a gesture that confused most alien species who were not used to physical contact. "We're here to talk." The Trelbian diplomatic coordinator, a crystalline being named Elgspor, attempted to follow the standard first contact script. "We request formal communication protocols and—" Marcus interrupted with a laugh. "Protocols are great, but have you considered just talking?" What followed was unlike any diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Instead of formal statements, the human team began sharing stories, personal experiences, moments of failure and triumph. They spoke about human diversity, about the challenges their species had overcome, about the complex tapestry of human culture. Aisha began describing quantum entanglement using a street art metaphor that somehow made the complex scientific concept completely accessible. Jacob started sketching a visual representation of interspecies communication that transformed the diplomatic chamber's walls into a living, breathing narrative. Dr. Lyra Vex, observing from a research station, could hardly believe what she was witnessing. The humans weren't presenting a diplomatic strategy. They were creating a shared experience. "We're not here to negotiate," Alina explained. "We're here to understand, and to be understood." The Galactic Concordance representatives found themselves completely off balance. These humans didn't follow any known diplomatic approach. They were simultaneously serious and playful, technical and emotional, strategic and spontaneous. Marcus shared a story about a military conflict resolved through unexpected communication. Aisha demonstrated how scientific breakthroughs often came from embracing uncertainty. Jacob created a live art installation that seemed to communicate more effectively than any technical presentation. Elgspor, the Trelbian coordinator, realized something profound was happening. The humans weren't just communicating. They were transforming the entire concept of communication. "Your transmission?" Elgspor asked. "What was its purpose?" Alina smiled. "Connection," she said simply. "Just connection." The diplomatic team didn't present technological advances. They didn't make territorial claims. They simply shared their humanity. Its complexity, its contradictions, its incredible potential for adaptation and understanding. By the end of the first day, the carefully prepared diplomatic protocols lay forgotten. The representatives from multiple species were engaged in something that felt more like a collaborative workshop than a formal meeting. The humans had done something extraordinary. They had transformed a diplomatic encounter into a human experience. And they were just getting started. The research facility on Centauri Prime hummed with an energy that defied traditional scientific protocols. Dr. Lyra Vex stood at the center of a holographic projection that mapped the ongoing transformation triggered by the human transmission. "It's not about technology," she explained to a gathering of senior researchers from multiple species. "It's about adaptation." The human diplomatic team had been invited to participate in a series of collaborative problem-solving challenges. What the Galactic Concordance had intended as a test had transformed into something entirely unexpected. Aisha O'Keefe, the quantum physicist, approached a complex computational problem that had stumped researchers for decades. Instead of attacking it with traditional linear thinking, she began to draw. Her sketches seemed chaotic at first, a mixture of mathematical equations, artistic representations, and what appeared to be completely unrelated imagery. Marcus Chen watched, his military strategist's mind seeing patterns that others missed. He began to annotate Aisha's drawings, adding contextual notes that seemed to bridge gaps between different scientific disciplines. The research team observed in stunned silence. Humans didn't solve problems. They reimagined them. A Trelbian senior researcher named Enksettel approached the holographic interface. "Explain your methodology," they requested, expecting a technical breakdown. Alina Rodriguez laughed. "We don't have a methodology. We have curiosity." The challenge presented was deceptively simple, a series of interconnected galactic resource management problems that had previously seemed unsolvable. Each species had approached these challenges from their own technological and cultural perspective, creating a deadlock that had lasted centuries. The human team did something entirely unexpected. Instead of proposing a solution, they began asking questions. Deep, probing questions that revealed underlying assumptions each species had never questioned. Jacob Novak, the street artist, created a massive interactive visualization. It wasn't a technical diagram, but a living, breathing representation of the resource challenges. As different researchers interacted with the visualization, new perspectives emerged. "We're not solving the problem," Marcus explained. "We're changing how we see the problem." The research facility's communication networks began to light up. Other research teams across multiple planets started to adapt the human approach. Traditional departmental boundaries began to dissolve. Interdisciplinary collaboration became the new standard. Dr. Vex documented everything. The humans weren't just solving problems. They were teaching an entirely new way of thinking. Aisha's computational approach broke through centuries of technological limitations. By introducing what she called contextual flexibility, she demonstrated how rigid problem-solving approaches had actually been limiting scientific progress. Technology is a tool, she explained. Imagination is the real breakthrough. The Galactic Concordance researchers realized they were witnessing something profound. The humans weren't presenting a specific solution. They were demonstrating a fundamental approach to existence, one of continuous adaptation, curiosity, and interconnected thinking. Marcus shared stories of military conflicts resolved through unexpected communication. Elena discussed how human medical breakthroughs often came from interdisciplinary approaches. Jacob showed how artistic thinking could reveal solutions in scientific challenges. As the day progressed, the research facility transformed. Traditional hierarchies dissolved. Researchers from different species began collaborating in ways that would have been unimaginable just stellar cycles ago. "We're not special," Elena said during a closing discussion. "We're just willing to be uncertain, to admit we don't know everything, to keep learning." The Galactic Concordance had invited the humans to demonstrate their capabilities. Instead, the humans had revealed something far more powerful, a way of existing that celebrated complexity, embraced uncertainty, and found strength in collective imagination. The galaxy would never be the same. The galactic conflict erupted with unexpected suddenness. 3 major species, the Vornax Confederation, the Crystalline Collective, and the Moran Sovereignty, found themselves on the brink of a devastating confrontation that threatened to destabilize entire sectors of space. Traditional diplomatic channels had failed. Centuries of accumulated tensions, resource disputes, and cultural misunderstandings had created a powder keg of potential destruction. The human diplomatic team arrived without fanfare. No weapons, no military escorts, just 4 individuals who seemed impossibly calm given the magnitude of the impending crisis. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the emergency diplomatic chamber. The holographic displays showed multiple star systems, complex resource maps, and centuries of conflicting territorial claims, where other diplomatic teams would have begun with legal arguments and territorial demands. Elena did something entirely unexpected. "Tell me your story," she said to the representatives of the 3 conflicting species. The chamber fell silent. This was not a standard diplomatic approach. Marcus Chen began to map the emotional landscapes behind the technical disputes. Aisha Okik started creating a dynamic visualization that revealed the interconnected nature of the resources in question. Jacob Novak sketched a living artwork that seemed to capture the deeper cultural narratives behind the conflict. The Vornax representative, a multi-limbed being named Kexera, initially bristled. "We do not need storytelling. We need resolution." "Stories are resolution," Elena responded quietly. What followed was unlike any diplomatic negotiation in galactic history. The human team didn't argue. They listened, truly listened. They helped each species hear not just the words of the others, but the underlying hopes, fears, and aspirations. The Crystalline Collective revealed deep-seated anxieties about resource scarcity. The Moran Sovereignty shared generational trauma from previous conflicts. The Vornax Confederation exposed vulnerable cultural narratives about survival and identity. Aisha's visualization transformed. What had initially appeared as a complex conflict map now revealed intricate connections. Resources that seemed to be points of contention actually represented opportunities for mutual growth. "You're not competing," Marcus observed. "You're afraid of being left behind." The diplomatic chamber became something more than a negotiation space. It transformed into a place of collective understanding. Jacob's artwork began to change. What started as separate, conflicting images slowly merged into a single complex representation that captured the shared hopes of all 3 species. Dr. Lyra Vex, observing from a research station, realized something extraordinary was happening. The humans weren't solving the conflict. They were helping the species solve it themselves. Elena's approach was deceptively simple. She didn't propose solutions. She helped each species see the full humanity, or equivalent emotional complexity, in the others. The Moran representative broke first. "We have been afraid," they admitted, a statement that would have been unthinkable in previous diplomatic encounters. The Vornax Confederation revealed their true concern, not territorial expansion, but cultural preservation. The Crystalline Collective shared their deepest vulnerability, a fear of losing their unique identity in a rapidly changing galaxy. As the diplomatic session continued, something extraordinary happened. The conflict didn't end through compromise. It transformed through understanding. Aisha's visualization showed a new possibility: collaborative resource management that benefited all species. Marcus mapped out potential cooperative strategies. Jacob created a living artwork that represented their shared potential. Alina simply smiled. "This is what connection looks like," she said. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as three species on the brink of total conflict found a path to mutual understanding. Humanity had done something impossible. They had turned a potential disaster into an opportunity for growth. And they were just getting started. The Galactic Archive would later mark this moment as a turning point in collective galactic consciousness. The human transmission, that initial, seemingly random burst of cultural information, had done something unprecedented. It had rewritten the fundamental understanding of communication, connection, and existence. Dr. Lyra Vex stood before the Galactic Historical Council, her presentation a culmination of decades of research. The holographic displays behind her showed the extraordinary transformation that had swept through multiple civilizations. Humanity's greatest achievement, she explained, was not technological. It was empathetic. The transmission had been more than a message. It was an invitation to reimagine what it meant to be an intelligent species. Educational systems across the galaxy had transformed. Rigid learning structures gave way to collaborative, creative approaches. Schools now taught emotional intelligence alongside technical skills. The concept of learning had shifted from accumulation of information to exploration of potential. Elena Rodriguez, now a senior diplomatic advisor, reflected on their journey. The initial transmission had been almost accidental, a collection of human cultural fragments sent out more from curiosity than any strategic intent. "We didn't know what we were doing," she often said. "We just wanted to share who we were." Marcus Chen had developed a new approach to conflict resolution that was now taught across multiple species. It wasn't about finding a middle ground. It was about understanding the deeper narratives that drove conflict. Aisha O'Keefe's interdisciplinary research methods had revolutionized scientific approaches. Researchers now understood that the most significant breakthroughs happened at the intersection of different disciplines, different perspectives, different ways of thinking. Jacob Novak's artistic approach to problem-solving had become a fundamental concept in diplomatic and scientific circles. Visualization was no longer just about presenting data. It was about creating shared understanding. The Galactic Concordance, once a rigid bureaucratic structure, had transformed into a dynamic, adaptive organization. Diplomatic protocols now prioritized empathy, creativity, and mutual understanding over rigid rules and territorial claims. Species that had been traditional enemies found new ways of collaboration. Resource conflicts that had seemed insurmountable were now opportunities for mutual growth. Cultural exchanges became the primary form of interstellar interaction. "We didn't conquer the galaxy," Elena would explain to younger generations. "We connected with it." The human transmission continued to evolve. Each species received and interpreted it differently. Yet the core message remained the same: a celebration of diversity, a commitment to understanding, a recognition of the incredible potential that exists when different perspectives come together. Dr. Vex's research revealed something profound. The transmission wasn't just a one-time event. It was a living, adaptive communication that continued to transform as the galaxy changed. Humanity's greatest strength, she told the Historical Council, was its ability to be uncertain, to admit it didn't know everything, to keep learning. The Krellian merchant who had first intercepted the transmission, Captain Zoran Tak, now headed an interspecies cultural exchange program. The young communications officer, Rixel, had become a leading expert in adaptive communication technologies. On Earth, most humans remained unaware of the profound impact their random transmission had created. They continued to live their lives, creative, messy, contradictory, full of potential. The galaxy had changed, not through conquest, not through technology, but through connection. As the Galactic Historical Council listened to Dr. Vex's presentation, a collective understanding settled over the chamber. Humanity had done something extraordinary. They had reminded the galaxy of its most fundamental potential, to understand, to grow, to connect. And they were just getting started.